We live in the age of the internet and social media and all of these wonderful things where everybody, not just academics and such, but everybody has access to nearly all knowledge that human beings have managed to put together. And as such, there's a lot of claims that get thrown around as truth. But how do you define truth? Because there are a multitude of different definitions of truth, and they each have their merits, and they each have their problems too. And I feel it's important, if you're going to make a claim and say this is truth, I feel it is important that you define specifically what you mean by truth. So there are as I say, there are a multitude of different definitions of truth, and I'm going to give you the 6. I think it's 6. I've written this down. Let me check. Yeah, it's definitely 6. Basically, I'm going to give you the most common ones. I'm going to give you the definition and throw an example your way. So, the first one is... Excuse me. The first one is what they call Correspondence Theory of Truth. Essentially, this means truth is what corresponds to reality. A statement is true if it accurately describes the way things are. An example of that could be a silly one. The cat is on the mat. Let's get all Dr. Seuss on us. With that statement, if the cat is sitting on the mat, then that statement is indeed true by the definition of correspondence. Makes sense? I hope so. So that's probably the most common definition of truth. That is the one that we in our day-to-day lives are going to use most often. We also have I can't speak today. We also have Coherence Theory of Truth, and that is essentially truth is what is coherent or consistent with a set of beliefs or propositions. A statement is true if it fits well within a comprehensive and coherent system. An example of that could be in a scientific theory, a new hypothesis is considered true if it coherently integrates with existing validated theories and observations. But that doesn't mean it doesn't necessarily mean that there is a correspondence there. It just means it logically fits within that existing group of previously validated theories and ideas. And then you have the Pragmatic Theory of Truth. Truth, in this instance, is what works or has practical effects. The statement is true if it proves to be useful or if it leads to successful practical outcomes. As an example of that, the theory of gravity is considered true because it reliably predicts behavior of objects and is useful in a wide range of practical applications. So that's essentially what the Pragmatic Theory of Truth is. But before I continue, the theory of gravity, just before anybody, especially flat earthers, jump on me, the theory of gravity can indeed be described as a pragmatic truth, but there is also coherence and correspondence in there too, so don't get too tied into the example I just gave you. So next up we have deflationary, I can't speak again, deflationary or minimalist theory of truth. Essentially, truth is a redundant concept. To assert that a statement is true is merely to assert the statement itself. As an example of that, saying it is true that snow is white is equivalent to saying snow is white. Now, this is one I don't really like. I try not to use it. It's a bit of a shitty definition of truth, in my opinion, because it is it takes away some of the emphasis of the point you're trying to make. It also implies that whatever you're purporting to be true is simplistic, and that your explanation of that truth is unnecessary and such. So I'm not really a big fan of that one, because I like explanations, but nonetheless, it is it's still a valid theory of truth. And then we have the Constructivist Theory of Truth. Truth is constructed by social processes, cultures, and languages. What is considered true is often dependent on social agreements and conventions. Morality and things like that tend to fall within this theory of truth, within the Constructivist Theory of Truth. As an example, different cultures may have different truths about moral values or social norms, which are constructed through their histories and their interactions and such. So those are true for them. It's still their morality. It's still a measure of truth, even though it's not necessarily objective. It's not it's not like a correspondence theory of truth. And then we have another one that I think is probably up there with the what's the word I'm looking for? With the correspondence theory of truth, of being the one that's most, or up there as being one of the most used in people's day-to-day lives, and that is the consensus theory of truth. Truth is, in this instance, is what is agreed upon by generally the majority, or by some specified group of people, particularly those in a position of authority and expertise. An example of consensus theory of truth is it's used in science. So scientific truths are often considered as such because they've been agreed upon by the scientific community through peer review and consensus. Now, just to add to that, just like I had to do with the gravity thing before, the anti-science and flat earthers and other morons jump on it, the consensus theory of truth isn't the only sort of what's the word I'm looking for, like theory of truth that applies to scientific facts, because the peer review process and so on actually requires external investigations and so on and so forth, where those people can come to a correspondence theory of truth, which then feeds into the consensus theory of truth. So those are there are other definitions of truth. There are some really wishy-washy shit ones out there as well. So one of the most annoying ones, pointless, nonsensical ones, in my opinion, is the my truth. My truth isn't any kind of truth, it's just opinion. There's no verification, there's no nothing, it's just your opinion, and you're branding your opinion as a truth. It's true that it's your opinion, but it doesn't make your opinion a truth. So the my truth, what should we call them? That group, they can get fucked, because that's just nonsense. Basically. So truth in itself is it's an interesting topic to dive into if you're going to get into philosophy and such, because it's vastly more complex than you might think at first. The vast majority of us have an idea of truth. And that idea of truth is something that we have gained. It's not something we've been taught. It's a byproduct of us being alive and having experiences. And for the most part, that tends to actually fall under the Correspondence Theory of Truth. But each definition has its pros and it has its cons, and you have to be aware of when each definition should be used. And I think as well it's important that when you make a truth claim, when you make a claim that this thing is true, whatever the thing is, I feel it is important that you that we all, in fact, actually stop to take a moment to consider and define what definition of truth we are using to make that claim. Because if you have two people in conversation and one of you is working with one definition of truth and the other is working with a different definition of truth, and you're having a conversation, but at no point have either of you defined your definition of truth. When one person says this is true, the other person says no, it isn't. And it might be the case that it's true, and it might be the case that it isn't true. But the big problem there is you're both working with your blinders on, basically. You are preventing yourself from actually progressing within that conversation because you haven't defined what you mean by truth. So yeah, that was just something I wanted to share with you today. It's something I think about a lot and talk about a lot, and I even, teach to people when I'm teaching philosophy. So it is something that I believe everybody should consider. Now, I don't think everybody needs to think about it in the depth and detail that I do and philosophers do and so on and so forth, because the vast majority of people aren't, going out in the world and debating and so on and so forth. But if you're having a conversation with a person, you need to know what definition of truth you're working with. You both need to know. All parties within that conversation need to know, and also need to agree upon the usage of the different definitions of truth within that conversation. Otherwise, the conversation can degrade very quickly into something that is not useful in any way, shape or form. So yeah, that was just something I've been thinking about of late. I would like to know, actually, before I go, and I will shut up and go away in a minute, so don't panic, but I would like to know what if you have a definition of truth that you use that I haven't mentioned. I would love to hear that definition. I think it's fascinating, the different definitions people have for truth. And also, to anyone who watched it and got upset because of my what I said about my truth, I would love to know, why is it you think my truth is actually a truth and not just an opinion? And how do you separate my truth from an objective truth or any of the other definitions of truth? I would love to know. So jump in the comments, yell at me, scream at me, whatever you need to do. Jump in the comments and let me know.